I said, yes. What about it? Well, I said, so's mine. It's a very uncommon name, isn't it? Yes. And I was sort of dismissed, and that was all there was from it. But you thought she would have been interested, wouldn't you?
I wonder where the name came from originally.
I don't know.
Quite unusual.
It is an unusual name. But your own name is so familiar to you that you don't always realise that it's an unfamiliar one. And
What sort of family did your mother come from?
my mother came, her father was a good many years older than her mother. I never met apparently I was on my grandmother's bed when she was dying. I was only a baby. But I understand from all that I've heard that she was an exceedingly good woman. Very kind to neighbours, very respected. None of them were well off. They were all pretty ordinary sort of people. And my grandfather had been in the army, and my grandmother met him when he was stationed at Dover, I suppose. And he is supposed to have come from a better class, what you call in those days, he was... and I believe he was a local preacher. He became a local preacher. And I met him a couple of times, and he was an interesting old boy, but I can remember of him. But my grandmother I never knew. And you see, in those days, Anne, you couldn't get round like you can today, and Dover for those days was a long, long way off. So the consequence was my father, he had a job in the railway. He was in the office of a railway, which in those days was considered, not too bad. But now I only know, by what my mother told me, because he was only 20 and my mother was only 18 when they married. And he got fed up with being, sort of sitting on an office stool in the railway office, and he came up to London. I think by this time they had 2 children.
Would you be one of those?
No, I was born later on. And I understand, I don't know, my mother never told me all the details, but I think my eldest brother remembers staying with the grandmother because he said they had horsehair furniture, horsehair sofa and chairs. They were covered in black stuff, and the horsehair used to get through, and like little pins, it could prick you. And he can remember having to sit quietly on these chairs, and the horsehair tickling his legs or something like that. I remember him telling me that once. Well, then my father came to London to see, I suppose, to get work in London. I suppose thought the streets were paved with gold. And they weren't. Then he got work eventually, and I think there was a very checkered little bit there. I think my mother and I think that there was some difference. My mother, that's right. The 2 children were left with my grandparents, and my mother separated from my father, and she came, she came to London, and she got work, and then my father, that's what it was, he came to London to find her, because he didn't know where she was, and ultimately they came together again. Unhappily, I don't think my mother had any affection for him, but he adored her, there's no doubt about that, right up to the very time she died. You know, everything was for her, nothing for himself. And then I was born, and then my younger brother was born, and, you know, it was sort of, I don't know, it just went on and on and on and on.
Where did your father come from originally?
Oh, from Dover. He lived mostly with his grandfather. And this grandfather lived in a little place called, begins with B, Barfreston. B-A-R-F-R-E, don't think there's a Y in it, F-R-E-S-T-O-N-E. And in Barfreston, I've been there once. And that's soon after the war, Grandad and I went for a holiday to Folkestone, which Uncle Stuart paid for, and we stayed at a hotel. And whilst we were there, we went to this village, and there's a little church there. I have a picture of it, and it's nearly 1,000 years old. Well, I know that my father has told me about this church many and many a time, and the bell is up in the branches of a huge tree outside of the church. And there when my father was a boy, supposed to have been there hundreds of years. And his grandfather, my father's grandfather, yes, had a small farm, and my father was brought up more or less on it, and he used to tell us all sorts of tales about old Squire Plumtree. Squire Plumtree, this is just like reading a book, you know. He had a huge watch. They had big watches in those days. He used to have it in his pocket with a big gold chain, you know, big enough to anchor a ship, and so on. My grandmother, my father's mother, I met once, and my great-grandmother, on my mother's side, I saw her once. I was only a little girl, only 4, 5, 6, something like that, and she was in bed, an old lady, and what I can remember about her is her white silver hair. And as though she was so old, I can still remember it was like silk, and it shone. And yet I was only a little girl, and that, you know, I got this impression.
Would she be your mother's father's mother?
She was my mother's mother's mother. And she was Granny Parks. Her name was Parks. Well, on one occasion I was taken down one Sunday for the Sunday League, and you could get to Dover and back for 3 shillings and 6pence. And my mother went with me, I think, if I remember rightly, and I suppose I had a half ticket. Well, that was a fortune in those days. And I can remember going down, and I can remember sort of going into a house and seeing my father's mother just the once, and only for a short time, and then seeing this old granny, and then coming back in the train. And that's all I ever saw of them. And then, you see, my father coming to London, my mother only had one brother. I knew him fairly well over the years.
Your mother and father met in Dover, did they?
Oh, yes. Yes, they met when they were youngsters. I don't know. I don't think they went to the same church, because my father was Anglican and my mother was nonconformist. And But I don't know, they met somehow or the other. And apparently he was very, very good looking. I don't know if I've still got a picture of them on their wedding day. But, you know, I mean, sort of that's the story. But my mother rose above it all, you know. And I think, you know, she was interested in so many things. You know, so many things outside of the home she was interested in.
She sounds a very interesting person from what you have said about her before.
Oh yes, I think you would have liked her, Anne, and she had great compassion. Although she wasn't, you know, she wasn't one of these gentle, you know, she wasn't one of these gentle creatures, you know, all soft and gentle. She wasn't that at all. No, she had great character and, yes, and great compassion, because she put herself out a terrific amount, and in our home, the lame dogs we've had in our homes, nobody's business. And it wasn't that they had a lot of money, they didn't. We were poor, we were very poor. But she never let it get her down. She always rose above it. Oh, and I could tell you all sorts of stories about the people we've had in our home. When we were children, now this is an extraordinary story, or at least I think it is. And the older I get, the more extraordinary I think some of the stories are, and they're true. This was a family. My mother and father, I don't know, they met them in London and found out that they all came from Dover and that they all knew some of the people in Dover. This is while they were young, they'd come to London. And you know how you make friends, and we were taught to call them auntie and uncle, but they weren't really. And this Aunt Louie, we used to call her Aunt Louie, she had become a Roman Catholic when she was about, I don't know, 18, 19, 20, and a very good Roman Catholic she was. And she had 4 girls, and the youngest of these girls was only a little baby, only a matter of months old, when this aunt became very ill, and she had to go into a hospital. And so arrangements had to be made, because there was no money. Whoever took on, they took them on for love, about the children. So she said, well, I'll only let my baby go to one person, and if she can't have it, then I won't go into hospital. And this was my mother, so they sent for my mother, and she asked my mother, you know, if she would have her baby. So mother said, yes, of course I'll have her, but she says there's just one condition. She said, in the event of anything happening to you, she said, and I shall pray God that it won't, we'll keep Mary, but she said, I will not have a divided house. She said she'll be brought up a Protestant. And my aunt let her go. So she must have thought very highly of my mother. And she did say to me once, years after my mother died, this aunt came to spend a day with me, and she was talking about mother. She said, you know, she was a very remarkable woman. I said, was she? Oh yes, she said, a very remarkable woman. So, you see, you get it there. So we had this little baby, this little Mary, and I was only a schoolgirl, 10 or 12, I suppose. And my mother had 4 of us, you know, so this baby was this one extra. But, oh my word, we adored the little thing. And mother looked after her, and you know. And I can remember one Saturday morning, in those days, they were, you know, the baby was fed on Nestle's milk. This was the thing. And the Nestle's milk had got low, and I'd been sent shopping. Long way we had to go to, and a mighty heavy bag, and I suppose I must have dawdled. And when I got back, the baby's meal was late, and I can always remember my mother landing me one fifth. "That baby's waiting for its meal," she said, "and you're dawdling on the way." And this little baby gained in weight, little Mary, and she got on well. And when she went, my father cried. He hated parting with her. Now this is what was nice in Grandad. He was there was a lot of kindness in him. A lot of awkwardness too. But anyhow, so dear little Mary went back to her mother. And in less than a year she was dead, because these people were so... well, my mother thought, and she was pretty charitable, she wasn't giving enough food, she wasn't getting enough food. This aunt didn't have much to manage on, and what we think may have happened was that she didn't, she sort of diluted the milk too much or something like that. Anyhow, the little one died. So that was one story. And then I can remember, this is all while I'm a schoolgirl of only, 10, 12, something like that. Then another story. Tell me when you've heard enough of them.
Oh, it's very interesting, actually.
Well, this is another story. This is a couple. My mother had a house, and to help to meet the rent, it was a 4-storied house. She let, we had 1, 2, then she let this floor, you see, and then on the top was bedrooms again. And there was a couple in these rooms that Mother let off with a little baby. And there was a terrible row apparently one night, and on the way upstairs to bed, my mother had heard the woman say to him something about, "I'm not your wife." She said, "I don't see why I should put up with this." And so the mother told me this when I grew up. So mother lay low, you see, she didn't say anything. But anyhow, the man cleared off, and he was a farrier. And he cleared off and left this woman with her baby. So what could my mother do? Feed the mother and the baby, and no rent. And this went on for a while. I don't know how long that went on for, and then she told she told my mother, "Oh, I'm going back to him." She said, he's not really a bad old sort. She said, "But we can't get married, so that's that." So whether he was already married or not, I don't know. But you see, Mother didn't put her hands up in holy horror. She just went on feeding them and housing them with what little she had. So that was that. Lots of sort of incidentals. I can remember living a few doors away from us. There was a unmarried woman, and she lived in one room, poor dear. And she was, she was ill, she couldn't work, and she'd been a needlewoman. And, I don't know, I suppose she was in the diggings of her hole. And my mother used to give her bits of needlework. This I don't know. And I can remember there was some chemises. Oh, and in those days they was this was supposed to be a new fashion. They were onto a square yoke. God. Anyhow, I can remember my mother, was when she was carving the dinner, an extra plate and, sort of potatoes, roast potatoes, a lot all on the plate. Another plate over the top, 2 hot plates, put in the bottom of a basket, needlework put on the top, and I can see my mother saying, "Take that to Miss So-and-so and keep your mouth shut." In other words, they meant to say we didn't have to go around telling all the neighbours, and then it looked as if I was taking needlework along. That's the sort of thing she did. Poor dear had to go into the workhouse ultimately, but Mother was kind to her. That was that, and sort of lots of little incidentals like that. Oh, and then we had, in these 2 rooms, we had a couple. They were a nice couple. They really were. Mr. and Mrs. White. And they had a baby. And my mother had got to know them because my mother and father lived in a big house, and they had rooms. and the people underneath, there was this young couple, they had rooms, and he was what they call a lighterman. He worked on the river, and
whereabouts in London was this exactly?
this was in the East End of London, and these lightermen, you know, in those days, not today, things are very different, but you know, they had periods when they were out of work and periods when they were in work, and when they were in work, they used to hope they'd earn enough money to pay for when they were out of work, but it was only by the sweat of their own brow. And there was a house going that this Mrs. White underneath, and she knew Mother wanted a house because of all the stairs that she had to go up and down, and all the water had to be carried up three or four flights of stairs, and every drop carried down again, and all that sort of thing. And she heard of this house going, she told my mother about it, and so Mother went and looked at it, so she, you know, it was all right. And so she said, and this was near where this woman lived. Well, the long and short of that story is that my mother and father took over this house, and these 2 rooms was taken over by this Mr. and Mrs. White. But Mr. White said to my mother, look, he said, I'm out of work. He said, I don't know when I'll be in work. So he said, I don't know when I'll pay your rent. Oh, well, said Mother, we'll wait till you're in work, and then you can pay it. And there she was, she took them on. I mean, and they had so little. It wasn't of their plenty that they gave. It was of their, not of their abundance. It was of their little. But she was nice. You know, she was bright and cheerful, and she never did the sanctimonious about it. And so Mr. and Mrs. White went to live in the same house, and of course, ultimately, he got work, and they never were in debt for their rent. And then they moved into a little house because they had another baby, and they said it wasn't big enough, or this was fair enough, and they went. And then they had a 3rd baby, a little girl, and this Mr. White, he so much wanted a little daughter, and she was born on Christmas Eve, I think. I think this was it, but anyhow, I'm not quite sure about this baby was only a sort of more or less a new baby, and he popped in one night, he worked on the barges, and the barge was near where he lived, and he popped home, and his wife said to him, thought we shouldn't see you till so-and-so, it's something to do with the tides. Oh, he said, I've only nipped up quickly, he said, to see our little daughter. And he nipped in to see her, you see, and he nipped off again, and he was never seen again. He slipped the ice and one thing and the other on the barges. He slipped overboard, he couldn't swim, and that was that. It wasn't that sad. And they were as happy as sandboys together. So that's another little story that's sort of woven in and out of my childhood. And this brother, of whom I was very fond, he brought home many a stray creature that was hurt, and I can remember one kitten. Oh, I can remember this. And I was only a little tot, I hadn't started school. And this is when we lived upstairs at the top of this big house. And my brother had brought home a kitten. I don't know if it was deserted or hurt or what, so my mother said to start with, she said, it's lousy. So she put a big piece of old flannel on the windowsill outside the window. They had wide windowsills in those days, and she smothered it in Keaton's powder. And that she said, she was so practical. She would get it clean, then she said, we'll start to feed it. And that's the sort of thing she did. Oh, she was a real character. But so bright. She was so bright, and she never, she never sort of felt she was good or anything like that. These things, there they were, they're practical, and she got on with them. She really was remarkable. And then, this is when I got older. Yes, because Grandad and I were courting at this time. And my mother worked for a mission in the East End of London. And She used to go to the women's meeting there and help there. And she got to know a girl called Sissy. Sarah Shacklady was her name. She was a lovely creature. Lovely, gentle creature, very, very good living. And very delicate. And she was in what they called in those days service. You know, you lived in and you helped with housework and all that sort of thing. And I suppose my mother was fond of her and she was fond of my mother. And she became ill. Now I can't sort of remember the beginning of this, but I can remember when I was about 17. Yes, I was about 17, and I was going off to work one morning, and my mother said to me, "Oh, so when you come home tonight," she said, "Sissy will be here, she's coming here to stay." So I said, "Oh yes." And I can remember coming in that night and seeing this Sissy I'd heard so much about, but whom I'd never met, you see. And I can sort of see her now as she got up to greet me. And that was sort of the beginning as far as I was concerned. But my father grew very, very fond of her, in a nice way, I mean. And she was ill, she got heart trouble. And her family, there was a big family. But they, I don't know, I suppose they weren't well off or something or the other. Anyhow, they weren't prepared to have her. And so she stayed in our home, and my mother nursed her and took care of her. And I can remember, now this may be spread over a couple of years, quite likely, I've forgotten this, but it possibly was. But it sort of got to that, you know, Grandad used to come at weekends, you see, to see me. And we all grew very, very fond of this Sissy. There's no doubt whatever about that. And she hadn't a penny piece in the world, not a penny piece. And she used to live by faith, and she really believed this. She literally lived by faith. And so my mother was sort of looking after her and nursing her and I suppose keeping her. But we didn't know how to get money across because we knew that she literally hadn't a penny. And we knew that she liked going to church. And we knew, naturally enough, she didn't like collection plate going by her. So we didn't know how to get round this. And my father struck the right. Here he said, what about her having a Saturday penny? Because you know what, when kids were little, you know, you had your Saturday penny, you lined up for your Saturday penny. Probably you don't know what this is, but this is the sort of thing you did. You had Saturday halfpenny, Saturday penny. And my father got over this and he said, he used to call her cook for fun, because she used to cook the meals sometimes. Cook, he said, about time you had a Saturday penny, isn't it? And that's how we got pocket money across. It's the only way we could do it. So this is, and then I can remember once saying to her, oh bless her heart, she was so gentle. She was so gentle and so good. And her coat, it was getting shabby, and I said to her once, hey sis, I said, you could do with a winter coat, couldn't you, love? Yes, she said, Flo. But she said, my Heavenly Father knows I want one, I'll get one. And she did. Just like that. Wasn't a brand new one, but it was a very, very nice one. So she got her coat. Well, then she had some friends in Nottingham. Oh, and she had a cousin who lived somewhere in North London, and she used to go and stay with her occasionally. And then she'd come back, you see. And then she had these people in Nottingham. Well, this is my mother again. It shows my mother, you know, she's another, well, I don't know, it was another light. But Sissy had been up there, and Mother had a letter from her. You know, she had more than one, but this particular letter, she got in it, oh, Mum, come and bring me home. So my mother said, oh, that's not Sissy. So before you, I mean, all the rest of us, we'd get our own dinners, all, you know, this didn't matter, you know, there's something you get on. And she was up into Nottingham, to these people's place. Well, this was a couple, and they had youngsters, and they were very, very religious. if reading your Bible for hours on end is being religious, they were religious. And if going to the church and having plenty of slaves being religious, they were religious, there's no doubt about that. And I suppose they acted according to their light. But they had a dairy, and in those days, milk didn't come in bottles, there were huge metal churns, and these churns had to be scrubbed out with boiling soda water. Well, poor old Sissy, who was as frail as could be, but had the heart of a lion, they'd been reading their Bibles. No churns scrubbed out yet for the morning milk, and their living depended upon selling their milk. And there's poor old Sissy out there trying to scrub the churns. Well, did my mother tear strips off them? Because Sissy told me this. Oh, Lord, she said, you should have heard your mother. She tore them to ribbons. And come on, Sis, pack up your things, you're coming back with me. And she brought Sis back and nursed her again. And anyhow, I think now, oh, she must have been with us a couple of years. And Grandad used to call her cook, because this is what she had been, you know, in service. And I was away from home at this time, and Sissy had been poorly. I'd been to see her, you know, in my mother's and father's home. And the doctor had been coming in to see to her, and one night, and she couldn't sleep, so Mother used to sit up, you know, sort of late with her and just sit with her. Anyhow, one morning my father used to take her in the morning cup of tea, because she was on the level of the floor with the dining room and the kitchen. So Dad used to, Grandad, you know, my father, used to take her in a cup of tea, you see, and then go on upstairs to my mother's room and take my mother's tea up, you see. And this particular morning he went in and he used to say to her, "Good morning, cook." And he didn't get an answer. So he thought, oh, well, she's asleep, I won't waken her because she doesn't sleep well. So he didn't waken her. He left the tea on the side, you know, by the side of her bed. And he came down, he used to get his own breakfast and go off to work, you see, and then my mother got up afterwards. Well, anyhow, he didn't feel comfortable, I suppose, and he went in again and he said to, you know, spoke to her, and there was no answer, and he drew the curtains back and she'd gone in her sleep like that. So that was the end of Sissy, and that's her story. But I think she got the best out of my father. I think she got more out of my father than any other living person. And she and Grandad used to get on well together. I can remember once, yes, this must have gone over a couple of years or more, must have done. Because I can remember on one occasion, Grandad and I were going to the Albert Hall to hear the Messiah. And she loved music. And we said to her, "Do you think you're well enough to go to the Albert Hall?" So she said, "Yes, I think so, if I take it carefully." So, of course, we couldn't afford seats, you know, down below. We used to have to go upstairs, and thousands of stairs. And the blooming lifts weren't working. Poor Sissy. So I said, "Hey, look, I'll tell you what, Sis, let's Sid and I make a cradle. And you sit on our arms." I said, "We'll get you up the stairs, love." So she said, "Oh no," she said, "everybody will be looking." So I said, "Well, let them look. That doesn't matter. I can get on with it." However, she was too shy for this, and I can remember, oh, so slowly we walked up those stairs. However, she heard the Messiah, and she enjoyed it. So that was that. But you know, it's funny, Anne, during the period, and this isn't sort of not the 2 years that she was more in and out of our home. I can't remember exact times, quite frankly. But there's a home in Berners Street which goes off Oxford Street. and it was called Bainbridge House. I don't know whether it's still there or not. But this mission in the East End, where Sissy used to go and where my mother used to go, there was a deaconess there and her name was Mrs. Brown. And I don't know how, but she got to know these people in the name of Bainbridge, and they were very comfortably placed. And so they bought these premises, and it was all fitted out to be a home for girls in London, you know, had no homes. They could sort of so much a week, something like the YWCA, something of that nature. Well, Mrs. Brown asked Sissy if she would go there as cook. This is before Sissy got, you know, she always had this heart trouble, but this was before she got very, very bad. And so Sissy went there, and here again my mother, you know, did a good job. She was a strong character, because after all, some of these strong characters, they do, you know, some of the time anyhow. This Mrs. Brown, although she was a deaconess, she was also human. Now I've got older, you see, I remember more about people being human, but I was mad with her then. She got her head turned by these people. You know, they were very well off, they were very nice people, and she sort of got all very social-minded over them. And stuff was coming in, you know, new beds and bedding, you know, the sort, you can imagine all the stuff that had to come in. And a lot of it was left because there was nobody else, but a lot of all this heavy stuff was left for Sissy to take up. She wasn't doing, you know, cooking hadn't started. And I know Mother went there one day and she worked down hard helping Sissy, and she said, "Sis, you don't think I'm going to let this go on, do you?" She said, "I'm in the word with Mrs. Brown." So Grandmother had a word with Mrs. Brown. I expect she did it all very nicely, you know. And so I think it eased up a bit, but even so, Mrs. Brown worked her very, very hard indeed. So hard that, you know, she became ill, and then this is when I think she came to our home. But of course, you see now today, she wouldn't, you know, they would know how to treat her because she was in and out of hospital. And isn't it funny, the little things that stand out in your mind? And I can remember her telling me once, she was a very sensitive, gentle creature. Not that you're not sensitive if you're not gentle, but and she was in hospital, you know, she'd gone to the hospital for an examination, and of course it was a teaching hospital, and she was laid out on this bed thing, you know, and all the students around, and she said she was so embarrassed. She was stripped right down to the waist, lying there with all these fellows around, and she said, although I was only, you know, sort of a case as far as they were concerned, she said I was a woman as far as I was concerned. And one of these students, and I've admired him for his courage, because, I mean, he quietly slipped forward and pulled the blanket up over Sissy. You know, when the examinations were over, he sensed her embarrassment, and of all that stood there, he was the only one that had the courage to quietly pull up the blanket. And so that's one little thing I can remember. And another thing I can remember, bless her heart, she went to a convalescent home, and it was run or belonged to the Anglican Church. And they were going to have communion. And this meant a terrific amount to Sissy. It really meant something to her. And they wouldn't let her take it because she wasn't a confirmed Anglican. And she said, and all the people present, Mum, she said, I wasn't allowed to partake of it. And this upset her very much, upset her spiritually. So isn't it a story?
How old were you when you first went to school?
When what did?
How old were you when you first went to school?
When I first went to school, about 3, I expect.
Seems very young.
Because you did go at 3 in those days. 3 or 4, but you didn't learn anything. And when I look back on it now, you know, sort of, I don't know, you learn to sing A, B, C, D. Nonetheless, it got us out of our mother's ways and, you know, so on. And I was in the same school the whole time I was at school. I went up from the infants to the upper school. And I wasn't unhappy at school, you know. I was very happy. But it was too easy.
You couldn't have had to do very much there.
Well, no, and it wasn't, you know, I mean, the point is it was the best education of the day, but oh heavens, I could have taken every class in that school when I left and did it as well as any of the teachers. I knew all the lessons backwards, forwards, sideways. And I felt sorry for all the other kids because it was always a foregone conclusion that I'd be at the top.
I think that must have annoyed some of them.
I think so too, Anne. I think it was hard luck. Although I don't think I thought it out then. You know, I just knew the work, and that's all there was to it.
Were your brothers at the same school with you?
Yes. My younger brother was sent to another school later on, but the others were there. Oh yes, we were known as a and my mother was respected by them, by the teachers, you know. And I can remember one schmozzle we had at school. This was over me. There was a master named Greystone. And I didn't like him as a master. And on one occasion, he was taking a class. Mind you, there were lots of kids in the class in those days, and 50 or 60 kids in one class. And he was taking this class, I've forgotten what it was, I fancy it was a geography lesson, not sure about that. Anyhow, he accused me of talking. Florrie, Seath, stop talking. So I said, I'm not talking, sir. Come out! So out I went, you see. So he said, you were talking. I said, I was not talking, sir. Go outside the door. So outside the door I went. And he said something about, you can come in when you apologise. Well, I had no intention of apologising because had I been speaking, had I been talking, okay, he could have had me out, he could have caned me, and I would have taken it. That was okay, wouldn't it? I'd been caned, that didn't trouble me. But I was not talking. So all this really blew up into a... So I didn't apologise that day, so the next day he marched me down to the headmaster. So the headmaster spoke. I said, look, sir, I was not talking. I said, so I can't apologise. So the next thing was to send for my mother. So my mother had to go up to the school. And my mother said to the headmaster, not in my hearing, she told me afterwards, she said, well, I know Florrie isn't an easy girl. She said, but I also know that she isn't a liar. And if she said she wasn't talking, then she said she wasn't talking. So the headmaster said, well, what do we do? She says, I don't know. She said, but if she wasn't, she wasn't. She said, so I'm not going to say anything to her about it. So that was that. But I knew my mother had been sent for, but I saw her. And but Mother was loyal. You know, she was loyal to both sides. You know, they were there. And I, you know, no good us going home tittle-tattling tails or anything like that. But this was a issue here, and they had sent for her. So they didn't know what the devil to do with me. And this is what I can remember. This is after my mother had been, and this was another day, you see, and this Mr. Grayston. Come along, he said, I'm taking you down to Mr. Ashfield. This was the headmaster, and I can remember this clearly. So we had big swing doors, you see, and you had to open those. You went down some more stairs, and there was more doors. And I stood at one side like the Queen of Sheba for him to open the door for me. I've never forgotten that. And when we got downstairs and the next lot of doors, you see, instead of me opening them for the teacher, I thought, no, you're a man, you'll do the opening. And so I stood at one side again whilst he opened the door. Well, in the end, Mr. Ashfield said to me, well, Florrie, he said, I can't let you go back to your class till you apologise to Mr. Grayson. Well, I said, if I go back, I still wasn't talking. So I was left outside the flipping classroom door. I got sick of doing nothing. So old Grayston came out to me. He said, well, Florrie, are you coming in? I said, yes, I want to come in. So he said, well, you know what you have to do. So I said, I want to come back into my class. May I come back into the class? And it was left at that. So Flo went back into her class. Boy, oh boy. And then when it was all settled down, my mother told me. Oh, I said, I'm glad you stuck up for me. She said, I wouldn't have done it if you'd been wrong. She said, but I know you don't lie, whatever else you do. So that was a how do you do, wasn't it? This was the same master who had said to me, where did your brother get his brains? You see, then this didn't make me like him. So, there we are, there's Britain. But you know, I used to go up and see them afterwards. You know, I went out once or twice to see the teachers afterwards, and I always got a right royal welcome from them. So I don't think I was too bad, really.
How old were you when you left school?
15. Should have, now you see here again, my mother, bless her heart, you know, she didn't know any different, I suppose. You see, instead of that, she let me stay on another year at school, which was of no benefit to me at all, because I didn't learn any new work. And this is the tragedy of it all. I didn't know what to do, and my parents didn't know what to do. There was no scholarships in those days, not at the school I went to, so I couldn't take any scholarships and go on elsewhere. And my mother, bless her, I suppose she thought it would give me another year at school, but you see, the point was, it wasn't any use to me because I wasn't doing anything new. So it was, you know, it was lost. And I suppose the only thing was I didn't go to work for another year.
How old would you have been when you met Grandfather eventually?
Not very old.
Not very old at all?
No, I was only about 16. And I met him through a business friend. I think I've told you that story, haven't I? Have I told you that story?
No, I don't think so, have you?
Haven't I? And I'll be telling you all the stories. There won't be any left to tell you. Well, this came about like this. Is just show you this, you know, what simple things, you know, sort of give you a pattern in your life. This was a job I had, and I was a very, you know, I think I was a bright, happy sort of a creature. And I was running down the stairs one day singing, and I didn't realise it, but I suppose I was singing a hymn, because this was about all I knew in those days. And this Miss Biggs, she was my senior. She's 10 years older than I was. And she said to me a day or two afterwards, she said, "Are you a Methodist?" I said, "Yes, why?" Well, she said, "You were singing a Methodist hymn when you went down the stairs the other day." I said, "Was I?" So she said, "Yes." Oh, I said, "I'm surprised why I was singing," but I don't remember. So she said, "Yes, you were singing so-and-so and so-and-so." So I said, "Oh, yes." So she said, "Well, I go to a Methodist mission." So, of course, I pricked up my ears, and also I was rather flattered by being taken notice of by somebody so much older than myself, you see. It's frankly flattered me. As I see it now, you know, as I look back on it. So she sort of took notice of me after this, and I naturally noticed her. And then she said to me one day, oh, she said, the mission that I go to are having a flower service. This was in Battersea. She said, would you like to come? She said you could, tea is provided there. She said, so you could stay to tea and then stay on to the evening service. Oh, I said, that'd be very nice. Well, yes, I'd like to come. So I can remember, Anne, I can remember as clearly as anything, saying to my mother, you know, all grown up, and I wasn't 16 yet, saying, oh, I shan't be into tea on Sunday, Mother. This was a big thing in those days. Kids didn't go out to tea. Oh, I shan't be into tea on Sunday. So my mother said, oh, all right. Got to be had a good giggle afterwards. Oh, I knew you'd have it all out before Sunday came. So anyhow, when the Sunday came, of course, off I went, and I stayed there to tea, and this was the first time I saw Grandad. But, you know, I didn't take didn't take any more notice of him than anybody else. There was plenty of other young people there too. Well, that was in about the June. They used to have flower service, and the mission was filled with flowers. And then it got to harvest. And Daisy said to me again, by the way, this Daisy's still alive, oh, we're having our harvest festival. She said, I wonder if you'd like to come to that. I said, oh, yes, I'd love to. Because, you see, at this time, Anne, it was a case, I was beginning to make up my own life sort of thing. And we had moved away so that I wasn't in touch with any of my school friends. I'd lost entire touch with them. And so I went to the Harvest Festival and I enjoyed this. And then in due course, I don't remember just how long after that, she asked me if I would go and take a Sunday school class. She asked me first, you know, she sort of said, you know, are you interested in church work? She said, and are you sort of, you know, sort of from the Christian angle? She said, are you, you know, I suppose, you know, was I trying to live a Christian life? I suppose something like this. I don't remember all the details. And she asked me if I'd take a Sunday school class. Oh, I think I'd like to do that very much. So I got I went down and I was accepted as a Sunday school teacher, and I got the Sunday school teachers magazine, you know, for studying up the lesson. Oh, it's been raining, love. It looks as if the ground's damp, or am I imagining that? And so this is how. Then I went down to the mission every Sunday and stayed there to tea. Oh, it used to be so jolly, these teas. Lots of young people there, and dear old Grandad was there, and he wasn't dear old Grandad to me in those days. And, you know, I wonder he didn't send me flying one day, because it was naughty of me. He was sitting playing the organ, and I went up and pushed notes down and caused discords. Boy, when I think back on it now, I can still go hot over it. But anyhow, you know, then eventually Grandad said to me one day something about, can I come and see you on the tram? Oh, yes, I liked. So he saw me on the tram, and then in due course we didn't take the tram at all. We used to walk part of the way, and he used to walk with me. And so it went on and on and on. And that was that.
What did you think of him when you first saw him? You know, what were your impressions?
Well, of course, I never thought about him as a boyfriend, you see, because there was a lot of fellows down there. And I had fun with all of them. I was always very lively. You know, and at the parties and that, I was, you know, really a lively sprite. And I entered into everything, the livelier the game, you know, the more I entered into it and all that sort of thing. So that I never thought about him as a boyfriend, ever, until he asked to come and see me on the tram, and I thought, who's there? And then he said to me one evening something about, he said, shall we walk to Vauxhall? So we walked to Vauxhall. Then it got on to sort of one day, he said, oh, come on, take my arm. So I said, not likely. Dear Grandad, I oughtn't to have said that. However, eventually we got where we did, bless his heart. And we had a very happy courtship, very happy marriage. The whole thing was very happy. So there we are, that's the story of dear old Grandad. Then of course the wretched war came. And we never didn't have any money. We were saving up for years and still didn't have enough money. But, well, that's the story. And this is something funny, I must tell you, Anne. Grandad was coming to my home. Oh, yes, let me tell you this funny bit leading up to it. You see, I'd gone home and I'd told my mother, oh, we've got a natty. Oh, I said, I had a fellow come and see me onto the tram tonight. So, Gran, she was a wise old owl. Now I look back on it. Oh, yes, she said. No more fuss about it. Then I said, oh, that fellow, I said, his name's Seath Barber. And, so on and so on. And one night, as I was getting off the tram, Grandad was with me. And he got off the tram. There's my father and mother waiting at the tram stop. Oh, she said, your dad and I were just having a walk. She said, we thought we'd come and meet. I thought, well, I wasn't so dim as all that. I knew they'd come to give Sid the once-over. And then it got after that. My mother said, why don't you ask Seath Barber home? I said, shall I? Yeah, she said, why not? So then it got that, then sort of as the time went on, because Saturday afternoon was the only afternoon that my mother and I had to do any shopping. Not that we did it very often, but I can remember on one occasion, my mother and I, we were going shopping, some drapery shopping, and Sid knew where the key was, and I don't quite know what happened. Whether my mother had said to him the previous week, and I don't know, something about we'll be out shopping. She said, but you can get the tea ready whilst we're out. Well, when we got home, I should think every piece of china that we had was on the table. And we entered the room, and there wasn't an inch to spare. And my mother just burst out laughing. Well, he said, I thought that if I put everything on, then I would be sure to put the right things on. And that was the relationship between my mother and Grandad. They got on famously. And there's the story. And I can remember once getting back to this sissy. I was thinking to myself, oh, I'm seeing too much of Seath Barber. This isn't wise. I ought to go out with some other fellows. So I was saying something of this. I said, oh, I'm going to go out with one or two other fellows. I don't think it's wise to just keep to the one fellow all the time. And Sissy looked at me, she said, don't you hurt Sydney, whatever you do. Quite seriously, don't you hurt Sydney.
She was right as it happened.
She was right, yes, bless his heart. But this, when you're young, you get all sorts of ideas and you sort of think, but we were soon back. We weren't very long before we were back on the old footing. There's the story. Mm. You know, my mother... Are you bored, Anne? Or
Yeah,
just...
not at all.
Well, this is another story about my mother. When you think back on them, I mean, their stories really and truly, they're such magnitude. I mean, it wasn't sort of just having somebody in for a few hours, you know, whilst their mother ran shopping or you know, this, that and the other. They were such, I think so. Now I look back on them. This was a story. My mother went for a holiday to Worthing. Well, my mother always went on her own. My mother and father didn't go away together for holidays. And my mother went away for this holiday, and she needed this because, oh yes, when I think about her temperament and all the rest of it, you know, I suppose she just had to go somewhere where she could relax. And this was a boarding house. And one morning at breakfast, there was a son belonging to the woman was a widow. No, what was her name? Newman, Mrs. Newman. She was a widow, and she was running this boarding house, you know, for a living. And she had a son and a daughter, and they were both at school. And one morning, I think my mother had been 1 year, that's it, and she was so comfortable there, she went again the next year. And Kenneth, he came in with the breakfast. And my mother noticed that either he'd been crying or he looked worried or she'd missed Mrs. Newman or something or the other. So when the breakfast was over, she waited till all the other guests had gone. And she went out, she called to Kenneth. Kenneth, she said, "What's the trouble?" So he said, "Mother's too ill to get up. She's in bed ill and she can't get up." He said, "And I'm trying to manage." So she said to him, "Well, go up and ask your mother if I may see her, if I may come up into her room and see her." The long and short of that story is that mother went up and she said, "Well, the doctor's..." Oh, so mother said, "Well, the first thing," she said, "is you must have the doctor." Well, she said, "I feel very ill." And she said, "I don't know what to do about the guests." Well, she said, "Give me your, you know," she said, what's the food for today? What would they have had if you'd have been up? So she said, "Well," she said, "leave off worrying about the guests." She said, "If you don't mind me going into your kitchen," she said, I'll manage all that with Kenneth's help." And so my mother said, "I have never," she told me, "I never in all my life saw," she said, "such stacks of washing up." The sister wasn't very helpful, but that's understandable when I tell you the later story. My mother thought she was a lazy hussy, but Kenneth was, you know, so between, and Kenneth is a schoolboy. So, "Come on, Kenneth," she said, "we can't do anything till we got all this washing up out of the way." So she said, "We'll start on that." And she said, "I've never seen such stacks of it." So Kenneth and my mother, we set to on these stacks and stacks of washing up. Now actually we'll see about the lunch. So I think mother set to and she